Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. I hope it's been a good session for everybody thus far, and we have a fantastic panel. And our focus in this is going to be talking about scaling deep tech start manufacturing in India. So I think there's been enough talk about India. Let's just talk about what's the deep tech movement. Is it really here? I would say it is. Whether you look at space, you look at batteries, energy storage, robotics, material science, the real test is, in our case, is not in invention. India's always been at the forefront of invention, right from the very inception of our society. If you look at, whether it was math or whether it was science, India always had the invention prowess. But the thing that we usually face as the biggest challenges is scaling those inventions into something bigger. So what are those challenges? While there are challenges, there are also lots of opportunities. So, the way I like to look at it as a founder, co-founder of a deep tech company is that, every challenge actually is an opportunity, because the harder problems that you solve, the easier it gets to be more successful, both commercially as well as, just purely on technology. So what are the challenges in India? The first is clearly the valley of death. And we'll talk a little bit about that with our co-panelists. The valley of death between the lab and the line. Lots of things work, in the lab. And again, I can tell you, we set up in 2018. We started with different materials. Things worked in the lab. The moment we tried to scale it a little more, went bust. But every failure actually taught us a lot more than some of the successes we had. And again, I think we'll touch upon that. The other thing is the manufacturing infrastructure is still quite fragmented. So we have some pockets of excellence. I think, Bangalore, Pune, Hosur, some of these areas are coming up as, manufacturing excellence. But still, there are significant challenges. Capital. I was very glad sitting up here listening to the previous panel, and both the founders, did say that capital is getting to become a lot easier to get. But deep tech startups, especially deep science-led ones, oftentimes hardware-led, need a lot more capital. And I think I was just talking to Avishek outside, and he was jokingly telling me that raising the 40 million that he did took him a very, very long time and 25 investors to get that kind of money. So it's not easy. It's there, but it's not easy. And then the talent gap. We do have a lot of talent in computing, engineering, but when you think of things like material science, precision manufacturing, for example, that's one area that even we in OffGrid find, there isn't enough as much as we would require. So clearly there is a gap there. And finally, the supply chains. It was very heartening to see the previous speaker speak that almost all the supply chain for her bio product is actually from India, and only one thing she was importing. But that's not true for a lot of the folks. But as much as there are these challenges, there are a whole bunch of opportunities too. The manufacturing push is real. I think if you look at the PLI schemes, you look at the semiconductor mission. I think the previous speakers just spoke about. There is a lot that's happening. Is it fast enough? I think time will tell. Is it good enough? Again, time will tell. But clearly, there's some green shoots there. Contract manufacturing seems to be taking off again. So those of you who are thinking of deep tech startups and don't want to necessarily get into the large capital outlay of building your own manufacturing to start with, there are outsourced manufacturings that are coming up. Corporates and PSUs, I would not say PSUs so much, but certainly corporates, are getting a lot more active working with startups. That's again a very welcome feature in India. And the China Plus One, India being in the center of this China Plus One, it's been a debate on for a long time now. But clearly, given the current scenario, I do believe that that's something that's catching on. And of course, talent is returning. It's just wonderful to see. Even here in this audience, I'm sure there are a bunch of people, perhaps even the majority, who've had experience of working or studying overseas and coming back to India, especially in areas like robotics, defense, space, and material science. So the landscape is shifting, and this panel is going to talk a little bit about that. So we won't just focus on what are the challenges, we'll also focus on solutions. What have these entrepreneurs and these ecosystem players on the panel done? And therefore the question is simple: can India turn world-class science into world-class manufacturing at global scale and speed? Scale and speed both are important, because timing when it comes to technology is just as important. So our objective is to make this session informative for everybody here. We are going to we're going to attempt to finish this in about 40 minutes and have enough time for Q&A, because that's something that we notice there is a lot of interest on. So I'm I'm just going to quickly, I'm not going to get down to the introductions. You've already got the introductions. Quickly though, Kedar, sitting on my right, he's the ex-director of Philips Ventures, 28 years plus of experience, deeply experienced. One fun fact about him, he's looked at over 300 different IPs. He's, if there's anything that was built out of this region in the health tech space, probably it passed Kedar in some form or fashion. Another fun fact, he's as passionate about, he's as good in giving advice on, the best made dosas in Bangalore as he is on IP in the healthcare space. So that's Kedar sitting to my right. Next, we have basically, sorry, I'm still a little old world. I've got my pages here. We got Avishek. Avishek wears very many different hats. He's actually a serial entrepreneur. He's had the, he's had the advantage of setting up 3 different deep tech startups, one in IoT, one in solar, and one in energy storage. He was just telling me outside that last year he just closed a round of funding, which was across seven countries with 11 investors. So I asked him, where are you resident of? He says, I'm the resident of a plane. So that's the fun fact, we have on Avishek. And then there is Sailaja Nori. She has a very exciting venture. She's been the co-founder and chief scientist, I love that title, of Sea6 Energy, which has been, since 2010, she's been leading research in transforming microalgae into sustainable solutions for agriculture, biofuel, and animal feed. The fun fact about Sailaja is that she's in the serious business, but she gets to go to some really serious, beautiful ocean and sea views for work, so she can expense all of that. So with that, let me just get down to the questions on the panel, and I'm going to start off with you, Kedar. The first question is really just to kind of get it warmed up. Is that working? Yeah. Yeah. The first question is really on the regulation. So people did touch a little bit upon regulation in the morning session as well. Yeah. Yeah. But I just wanted to talk about 2 areas on regulation. One is how is regulation evolving in the Indian context? But most importantly, how does regulation impact the navigation of strategies for deep science and deep tech startups when it comes to scaling the manufacturing? So just talk us through that a little bit. Right.
So I think maybe for the basic part of the medical devices regulation part of it, the first and most important part is the intended use part of the definition of that, because that dictates what's the risk classification of that particular device, and from that the regulatory path actually emerges. So it's very important that as entrepreneurs have a clear indication of use and intended use of the particular medical device, whether it's a device or software as a medical device. So that actually influences whether it's a low risk category kind of product like surgical sutures to all the way to pacemakers or other type of high risk device categories. And that influences because it is directly linked to the patient safety and risk part of it, the evidence generation burden actually increases. So your regulatory strategy actually must take into consideration that depending on what is the classification of my device, what is the kind of evidence, clinical evidence, effectiveness evidence that I need to furnish and then get that particular through. So on the CDSCO side, there are 2 parts. One is for the investigational portion. There is a separate track to do clinical investigation and generate the evaluation, the study outputs as such, but also for the other thing for manufacturing licenses, there is a separate approval process that's there. That's actually evolving. I think it still takes, depending on the risk category and the classification of the device, can range between couple of quarters to actually go up to more than a year or so. So that can actually, so the entrepreneurs also need to keep that particular thing in mind, that what's the runway that they have, what are the ways that they are going to have the clinical partnerships to create that evaluation evidences part of it, and then go through that process completely. So the CDSCO portion is evolving. It is getting more digital. So your question that, okay, how that particular scenario is coming up is is not yet as predictable as the FDA 510K, right? So if I just take an example of the US-based system, which has got more predictability in the regulatory part of it because there are more defined regulatory paths which are there. And sometimes it can also help if, depending on the type of customer segments and in the product category that the entrepreneurs are actually having, that you have, if there is a reimbursement outlook elsewhere in other markets that would be there, then complete the regulatory portions and in the reimbursement path activated for that, and then also leverage that for your CDSCO approvals. Sometimes it can help to shorten that particular part of it.
No, that's great. So basically what you're saying is that as startup founders looking to scale manufacturing and go big, from a regulatory standpoint, plan for time, because it could take up to a year, and that's a lot of time, for startups that are in the early stages. Number two, I think what you're suggesting is that there may be some congruence in the, that if you got one regulatory approval, let's say in India, there may be some congruence in the regulatory approvals across the region. Try and see if you can adhere to some of those so that you can get faster access to those markets from a scalability point of view.
I can add more international flavor as we go along subsequently. But two things that I would add specifically is that during the time planning, it's also good to invest and bake in the quality management system and risk management system. Because once you take the CDSCO route first, or you go an FDA or a CE MDR route first, the importance of having an ISO 13485, an institutionalized QMS system, and also your risk management house in order, not only makes it easier to traverse the regulatory path, but from a corporate attractiveness portion for partnerships related part, it plays a significant weight part of it. So I would add those two aspects to that.
Wonderful. So I'm going to come back to you, Kedar, but I want to move on to Avishek.
So
go ahead.
See, I mean, it was a very interesting discussion, and because we're talking about deep tech and scaling deep tech, when we talk about deep tech, it's solving key critical science problem to enable something new. It is same thing in the biotech, it is same thing in the batteries. And when you solve something new, you reach to a new problem. And when you're talking about scaling, I can correlate, which is how to deal with that problems. Regulatory is one if you're looking into biotech. But for example, batteries, we were solving, at VFlowtech, we're trying to make a better battery which is safer, which is inherently has a higher lifetime. And you are competing with the traditional technologies like lithium-ion batteries, which has a fire risk. Now, you have made a product as a deep tech founder, or you want to deploy the product. Now, there is no regulations that exist for your own product. And that part delays the entire process, and which we were talking about it, that there has to be time limit, but that time you don't know because that things are not in control. And that's where for a broader audience and government agencies, there is a process of sandboxing technologies to scale it up, even for biotech. And I'm a board member of a biotech company, which is solving a vaccine problem for a shrimp, and there are not much regulations. So how do you, and the founder has to sell the product. And if you are not selling the product, which is not validating it, you are not able to scale it up. So that sandboxing approach need to be widely pushed across government agencies, and there has to be ecosystem to enable that sandbox that validates your hypothesis, and that gives you a data point, and that will give regulators to have that inculcated in the next series of regulations and approval.
Great point. Actually, I agree with you even on personally, because at OffGrid we had exactly the same thing. Our chemistry is not inflammable or as risky as lithium, and it was an issue. But moving on, Abhishek, given the fact that you found companies in some of the most hyper competitive space, solar, which is like one of the most competitive spaces, IoT, and also energy storage, which is difficult and competitive space, right? So I just wanted to shift this conversation a little bit towards when you started to scale these companies, how do you think about the cost competitiveness? Not only from an India perspective, but also from a global perspective, because a lot of the deep science companies build in India, build for the world. So we do serve the Indian market, but also look at the global. So it'll be wonderful to hear from you as to how you attempted to do this. I know you've done this at scale, both in solar as well as you're trying to do that in energy storage and in IoT now.
It's a very painful question, and every time I have done it, I have told myself not to do it again. But
Done it thrice still, huh?
yes, and every time I have done it, I want to stay away from manufacturing. But somehow I end up in manufacturing. It's a very painful process. So by the way, it's not always the cost problem. The cost problem comes when there is a scale. I started my PhD in solar when the cost of solar was about $4 per watt peak. It was to reduce the cost, increase the efficiency, and I did a PhD on thin film silicon because silicon was the most expensive thing in a solar panel after silver. And when I did it, then China was building gigawatt of solar wafers. So the cost, and I realized that if there is abundance of something in nature and there is demand, the cost of anything can come down. And that was a motivation to jump from my PhD to get into solar manufacturing. And we set up the first gigafactory for a company called REC, which is now owned by Reliance. It was making from sand to silicon to solar wafer to module all the way. And that gives me a viewpoint of how things can be produced from end-to-end supply chain and ecosystem. I was doing quite good in the company, and then I realized that when you unlock supply chain, you need to be competitive on a global. So the problem is understanding the process, understanding the supply chain ecosystem, and India was producing about 4 gigawatt of solar wafer modules, very less, and they were producing solar panels for water pumps, not caring for high efficiency. So I set up a company called SunConnect. The idea was to connect people in solar through knowledge and wanted to improve manufacturing in India. And I tried to work on setting up a manufacturing AI process in 2017. And I realized that maybe it's too early for that kind of thing in 2017. And I realized that people need service. So we built a service company. We have supported 20 gigawatt of solar and wind, and 30% of India renewable energy ecosystem has been supported because the knowledge is there. And India has grown in from 2017 to now roughly about 150 gigawatt of solar and wind. And
India is now the world's fourth or third largest,
third,
right? Solar generation.
Solar
correct?
generation,
Yeah.
third. And I realized that solar, while it's, as a renewable energy transition, is cheap. It's cheaper than coal in 2017. And I played a major role in building the half-cut PERC technology. I realized that solar, we're talking about all sustainability, but more the solar is highly unsustainable because you can't control something. So you need grid level batteries, and you need batteries, and you need to scale new technology. I have been quite fortunate enough to be in Singapore. I say fortunate because it gives you an open ecosystem to China, to Korea, to Japan, how things are happening. So I've been observing quite closely that in China, you have first government has a problem that this is a requirement. And then the ecosystem of supply chain technology comes together, and that scale up happened quite easily. And I was of a firm believer that there is a need for technology. There's a need for technology beyond one technology cannot solve all the problem. I met my co-founder, Dr. Arjun, in 2018 in Singapore. Again, a wrong choice of country because there's no market in Singapore. So if you're building a deep tech and no market, it's become very difficult to raise funds.
But you had a good life there, right?
I would say, that's a debatable topic. So I was a firm belief that solar needs batteries, and that's the thesis of OffGrid. And with the battery technology, you need different technologies for different application. And all technology put together brings a sustainable change. So formed VFlowtech from that perspective, and then the idea was where to use it, what are the markets. So we found out the market, then you found out the market, then you the supply chain, and that's the topic we will discuss.
So hang on, you are actually a wealth of information for everybody in the audience, including myself. So I'm going to stop you there. So it's interesting. You talked about a hyper-competitive market in solar, where you actually were an early adopter in terms of setting up manufacturing in India, which did not sustain at that time. What year was that?
2017.
Okay, yeah. So 2017. And did you sunset that and then you got into services, or did you continue, or you sold that venture to somebody?
No, so it's still there. We have a 250 engineers teams. We are developing new IoT.
So you did manage to,
scale it up. So we are a profitable company in
right.
that.
And as a result of that, the success you had in the solar business, you found a downstream that storage would become the next logical step. Is that how you thought about it?
No, first of all, if you have been grilled for 20 years in a PhD and then developing new technologies, unknowingly you get into a point where you want to create something new. So the solar business became quite stable. I mean, we have a stabilized customer. There's a CEO running it. Then you have a new challenge, and I thought building something, a new technology, which India needs right now, understanding India ecosystem, and if you're able to scale up new technology with 100% local supply chain, I think that's a big achievement, and think it's possible. To do that, it's a lot of challenges. I thought of taking the challenges, met an exceptional co-founder who, I have since my own PhD and then worked in 3 to 4 universities, working multiple domain. It's very hard, even in a lab scale, which we were mentioning, to make a product. I mean, you can make a small product, but a product that is ready for commercialization, so not many scientists died. So my co-founder is a good engineer, and he had built this battery where he had made a quantum improvement on a technology. Most battery efficiency at AC side is about 60%, 65% non-lithium technologies. And he had made 10% improvement to the innovation on IP. So that was worth exploring to scale it up. And I don't regret that journey.
So I'm going to come back to you. I'll have a few more questions for both of you, but let me head towards Sailaja because she's sitting quietly and Sailaja, I want you to really tell us the C6 story. Because this is I did read up about your company before this, actually last night, early this morning, and I was quite inspired by the story. You've been at it since you finished a PhD for 10 years. So tell us the story on, and how you got into the seaweed farming and how that has scaled up. Because you again mentioned to me that there are a few other players around the world who are doing this. Like I know one in Sri Lanka, but they're much smaller. So tell us your story. Tell us about how you've scaled this.
Yeah, so we started in 2010 with the vision to actually create the future feedstock, bio-based feedstock that can actually scale to the levels of fuels and chemicals. Because if you look at India, we import almost 85% of our crude oil today. While we are developing alternatives in terms of electric, renewable and other sources, but there's still some energy sources which really require very high energy density, like aviation fuel and chemicals and actually materials which come from crude oil today, right? So we said, can we actually create bio-based feedstock that can actually give solutions to all of these areas, right? And when we looked at India's requirement for crude oil, that translated to almost 1 billion tons of biomass. That's almost the entire agricultural productivity of our country today. So we said, if we have to grow another 1 billion tons of biomass, how do I magically get it, right? We have the same amount of land, same amount of fresh water. So we said, what if we go to oceans? There are resources which are really untapped, and there are plants which grow in the oceans. They don't need fresh water, they don't need land, they don't need nutrients like the fertilizers that we use in the traditional land agriculture. And it really looked like a very sustainable source of biomass. And that's where we actually began in 2010 out of the campus of IIT Madras, right after we finished our graduation, with the vision to create this next generation feedstock. And we have two verticals of research and development. One which is focusing on how do we grow this biomass at scale on the oceans. And ocean agriculture is something which has never been done before in the entire world. We are actually the first company to actually attempt something like this and build the necessary technology, infrastructure, ecosystem around it. And the second part that we were focusing on was also how to take this feedstock and develop applications. So when we actually create the 1 billion tons of biomass, people are not worried about, okay, what do I do with this, right? So we had two research divisions. And over the last 16 years, we've actually developed and automated a lot of seaweed farming. Like you said, seaweed farming is not new. There are plants which grow in the sea. It has been growing in countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, where they have very shallow waters. Like you can walk into the ocean, need 500 meters into the ocean, knee deep water. You can do it like a cottage industry, right? So when we looked at the costs that actually go into the biomass production, you practically don't have any input costs. All you have is the labor cost and the cost to keep the seaweed on the surface of the ocean. And we said, what if, this is like the stone age of land agriculture, right? So we said, what if we actually use our engineering capabilities to intervene and bring in automation, bring in technology to actually scale this up, because the ocean resources are unlimited. We are sitting on 70% of our Earth's surface is ocean, right? So that's kind of how we started, and we have worked and we have developed the technology to grow the seaweed at a large scale. In February 2024, we actually commissioned a 100-hectare farm off the coast of Lombok in Indonesia, where we demonstrated this along with the support from Indonesian government. And the curious thing, everybody asks, why did you go to Indonesia? So that's where I think when we were talking, in the other panelists were talking about regulatory, we don't have policies to access sea surface in India for private companies. This is a very new and untapped domain, and Indonesia is very proactive in this. They look at oceans as resources, so they actually had policies where you could lease, like if you want 100 hectares or if you want 1,000 hectares on the sea, I can lease it to you if you're a company. And the lease will last as long as the company is alive. I mean, it's surviving, right? So it was very interesting for us. So we worked a lot with the Indonesian government to get those leases. We demonstrated the technology. All of the technology developed, designed, prototyped, manufactured in India, sent to Indonesia just for deployment. So now we are actively working with the Indian government so that they release policies so that we can access the vast coastline that India has. We have more than 11,000 kilometers of coastline as a country, and we never think of ourselves as a water nation, right? We always think of ourselves as a land, as a resource. So, and in the course of the scale up, I mean, we had to do a lot of technological innovations, like we identified.
Just one second. What was the biggest hurdle when you started? Because this was, sorry, you were the first in the world to try and do this at this scale. So what was the number one hurdle you faced, and how did you overcome that?
I think it being at the intersection of biology and engineering, I think getting funding for such an idea, I think is one of the major hurdles. But we have raised a considerable amount of money in the past 10 years from reputable VC firms. So in the entire journey, I think we had to develop each technological piece ourselves because nobody did this before. Right from how do I develop machines to automate the seeding, harvesting, how do I bring the biomass from ocean to land to process it, and how do I operate and work in the oceans, because we are so used to working on land, but we're not used to working on oceans, right, at a very large scale, except maybe the oil and gas industry. So each of those boats, the custom design of boats, how do I do anchoring? How do I do anchoring without sending anybody down the ocean, right? So all of these were like technological pieces. We had to innovate. We had to build it all in-house. We had to build the boats. We had to build everything ourselves. And when you're on the oceans, you can't just say, okay, can I just go and check if my patch is ready for harvesting? I have to look at drone monitoring. We have to integrate drone monitoring, data analysis. All of that had to be integrated for us to know, okay, I seeded this on this day. I need to harvest it on another day. So it required a lot of technological interventions for us. So we did a lot of breakthrough there. We solved a lot of those challenges. Now we are actually on the path to scale up and reach the 1 square kilometer completely, operationalize the 1 square kilometer completely. And the other one was the policy, like I mentioned. How do I actually work with the governments to enable regulation so that this can become mainstream for a country like India? I mean, it could be a very strategic move for India to actually develop this feedstock and convert it into aviation fuel. So now we are working with one of the largest oil and gas companies in India, HPCL. We have an MOU with them to actually take this to aviation fuel in the next 3 to 4 years. So then the other thing is about community. Like I can't just go and install a 1 square kilometer farm in the middle of an island in Indonesia, right? I need to work with the community. So there was a lot of local liaising that needed to happen. And we navigated that with a lot of local people. We had to build those teams in Indonesia, work with them remotely, especially during COVID, all of those. I think there were a lot of challenges there as well. And lastly, I think funding for such an idea, which has never been done before, I think that is still, when we want to scale up from, let's say, 1 square kilometer to 10, you really need to invest that capex and that funding to actually get there. Yeah.
Got it. So, one theme, I don't know if the audience has noticed it, is the one theme across all three of these panelists is the intense, incredible passion, that they exude in the businesses that they have built. And, 2 of them have built several businesses. One of them has funded several businesses over 28 years. So I think that passion, it's coming clearly from the heart. This is not about making money. This is about making a difference, coming up with something brand new. And being the first to do it at scale. I think that, that really is one theme that I take away. But moving on, I'm going to come back to you, Kedar. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Since you've had so much experience on the corporate investing side from Philips Ventures in essentially the healthcare, I'm sure in the audience there are people who want to know a little more on that. So can you give some examples on what would a corporate venture capital investor look at when they're looking at health tech startups, especially in the deep science space out of India? What would be your advice to them? Given, and it could best be enumerated with maybe a couple of examples.
Right. So typically, if I look at it from a corporate lens part of it, so fundamentally it starts with what's the kind of the long-term strategy for the corporate, and where does this external innovation or the ecosystem based innovation which is emerging, where does that fit into that particular strategy? So it starts with that particular lens, that is this something as a new space that I want to kind of explore, test, de-risk before I get completely myself or start a new business category by myself into that particular part. And hence I want to explore some of this particular stuff. Or I want to strategically expand from my current business lines, let's say maybe medical equipments, to more informatics related part of it. And then I want to do this particular thing that instead of doing by myself, my organic efforts may not be as fast as what the ecosystem is actually progressing at the speed at which, and hence I should collaborate and then grow inorganically also. So it basically comes from a corporate mindset or the aspect of what's the inorganic growth strategy for that corporate that needs to be implemented.
No, but when you're sitting on the side of the corporate or the investing corporate and looking at startups, what would you be looking at in the startups?
Yes.
You're saying it. So how much do they fit into your
Yes.
corporate strategy?
So I come to that part. So fundamentally, the how much is the house is in order in terms of things that if I need to make a corporate partnership as such, how much is the QMS setup? How are the clinical collaborations that are actually being orchestrated by the founding team? Is there a deeper engagement with the key opinion leaders who are there? How are the publications at reputed journals that are actually being published to demonstrate the clinical evidence part of it? Also the clarity about the founding team in terms of what would a joint proposition would look like, your solution plus the corporate solution. How does this particular thing, so I'll give an example, like as you mentioned. For the cath lab business actually was looking into how to improve efficiency during the cath lab procedure. And I identified a company actually that was based in South Korea, which actually does the analysis of cath lab angiograms to do the vessel analysis on the fly, give the AI-based feedback, and then make a stent recommendation while the surgeon is actually doing this particular decision making. And that is a kind of a strategic relevance to the cath lab business to get that particular technology, work with this particular company, and then bring, because the rest of the piece of the market activation part of it, plugging into the system that already the Philips would have it. So, but this particular piece of doing on-the-fly analysis and then actually integrating and improving the efficiency at the table, that is valued as a strategic importance, and take it.
So it's basically, what's the technology innovation that the startup is bringing in that can very easily get embedded into existing solutions that the corporate venture arm is looking at, right?
I think different flavors. Some people want to see that how does it complement the existing portfolio. Some people may want to do it for the new portfolio as such. Yeah. But also, while this example is very much embedding into the existing solution, there are also examples that you actually you have a marketplace and where there are multiple AI companies can actually participate. So you are not actually going to make a choice that which one is going to your customer with, but you give the choice to the customer that which they would like to use. So if they want to use 3 different AI cardiology solutions, then
so you're aggregating all the solutions.
But also making a marketplace
for
them.
Got it. Thanks. Hey, Avishek, I must ask you this because you've been in very tough businesses: solar panels and energy storage. Energy storage, I can relate to. Solar panels, not really. So tell us a little bit about the manufacturing. How have you scaled manufacturing? What are the some of the difficulties you've had and how you've solved for them? Maybe some you haven't solved as yet, but just talk to us a little bit. Give a little flavor to everybody on what it's like to scale these large businesses.
So I will generalize it to any deep tech because the challenges are very similar. Sure. So it's solar. I mean, let's start with the battery. So battery, once you have done on a lab scale and then made some product, solar and batteries are commodities, which makes life much more harder than making a space because nobody's asking about the cost. Here, you need to make an ROI and customers are using it. So there is a cost benchmark where you will be able to sell it. Now you have to produce it at a scale. And this is a problem that I've been discussing with all. So if for a company like VFlowtech has to manufacture something in India, technology is new. There is not much demand. So you have raised capital, you have built product, now you have invested in the capex. There is not much demand on that particular aspect. And you have 20 other components that goes in your batteries or in solar, which involves membrane, which involves, and there is a certain quality. So if you can't...
All expensive stuff, right?
All expensive stuff. So at the end of when you manufacture, you need raw materials. Raw materials in a certain shape and that need to have a certain quality. If any of the things does not match, the yield is very poor. And that is one example which we are seeing, I mean, companies like Reliance or Ola, which has promised to make 10-20 gigawatt of renewable batteries, that's lithium-ion batteries. But the yield that we are able to achieve is about 60% and you are not competitive. That's the same thing with solar. Solar, we are able to get 90% of raw materials from China, but our yields, I mean, the amount of silver that we consume in Indian solar cell is 120 milligram, whereas China consumes 90 milligram. So the amount of silver only you will win the race. So the challenge is the supply chain is not there. There are not many vendors, so you have to give a larger order for a vendor to be developed. Unless the vendor is developed, it cannot do it. Having said all these things, and government, a good thing about current government is they are quite receptive. And I'm glad to say that, these PSUs have been listening. So for the first time, we have a tender for 100 megawatt hour, which is roughly about $50 million of project that NTPC has said to do it. And that will help suppliers to come in. So you have to leverage is a very, and I was talking to one of the Silicon Valley VCs, how the US companies or semiconductor companies have grown is by leveraging each other's advantage. And China, you leverage your vendors. So when you scale up, you have to leverage. If there is no vendors, no supplier, what will you leverage? So you have to master the art of leveraging. And if you're able to do it, leverage government relationship, leverage the demand, leverage
So what he's saying is
supply
basically
chain.
you got to hustle, right? I think if you got to be an entrepreneur anywhere in the world, including India, you got to hustle. I think his answer is a very, very good one on, he took some help from the PSU, some help from the government, and obviously a lot of innovation that you and your team have driven to ensure that at least you survive so that you can thrive another day.
There is no short-term solution if you are in a deep tech hardware and manufacturing. You need to play a game of patience. You need to have your roadmap. Stick to the plan. You will not be able to produce the first 100 megawatt hour and make a profit. Impossible. You need to align with your board as well.
No, we are doing only 10 megawatt. That's right. But anyway, final question to Sailaja, and then we'll open up because I know we're running out of time. I've been already told that our Q&A should start, but I'm going to give Sailaja maybe 60 seconds. I'm really keen to know. So you said the first 1 kilometer or first hectare is going to get done this year. So what's the next goal for you from a scale standpoint? Because you're anyway the world's first, so you really have no benchmarks, right? You're setting the benchmarks.
Yes. So the first 1 square kilometer will be done the next financial year. It will be completed. And post that, based on the business requirements that we have for the verticals that we are building in the downstream products, we will go to that scale, which will be in the order of maybe 30 to 50 square kilometers, will be depending on the business requirement.
In
That
terms
will
of
be
revenue, what would that mean? Potentially.
Potentially, it could go to, based on the products, it could go to 50 to 100 million possibly in the
That's
next
great.
5 years. Yeah, the next 5 years.
Great. Excellent. I know there's a lot more that the panelists have to add, but we've got a time pressure because there are several other great sessions waiting. So we're going to open this up for perhaps 3 questions. Is that okay? Because I think we would want people to ask. So, please raise your hand. I can't really see. Yeah, I can see now. Okay, there's one at the end there. please give your name, and if you want the question addressed by any one of the specific panelists, please say so. Otherwise, you'll have to go by my choice.
So no manufacturing scale-up happens without a great university ecosystem, right? And I see a panelist from IT Madras, that's great. But I think I don't see the level of collaboration here between the university, private university, and just would like to have your thoughts. I studied in Chennai, in UK, in France. Honestly, the collaboration I have with, the UK university is much more than college in Chennai. So what are your thoughts on this as you scale up manufacturing?
So, I'll just kick it off because this is very, this question is pertinent to me as well. As, I suggested, I'm a co-founder of this company called OffGrid Energy Labs. Actually, OffGrid Energy Labs was given birth at IIT Kanpur in 2018. We actually used IIT incubated us to start off with, and we used the IIT labs to do some deep research. We have over 60 IPs that were built all out of India. Most of it was out of the labs, which we got used to completely free for over 7 years, to do. So I guess your question is that, is there a proactive mechanism? In my own opinion, since we set up OffGrid, I can tell you this, there's been significant improvement. We get a lot of support now. But yeah, can there be more? My personal opinion, yes, there can be. But it's certainly, it's certainly in pockets. IIT Madras has an excellent, IIT Bombay has a very good system as well. But if you argue outside of the IITs, maybe ISC. But anyway, I'd love for the other participants to also.
So, there's two aspects to your question. First is that innovation is happening in India at different universities. For example, we have been beneficiaries because we use vanadium, and we have been collaborating with IIT Delhi to get vanadium from petroleum waste, so local production. We have been also, and tier 2, we have been working with a institute called PDU, Pandit Deen Dayal Energy University, to deploy our first battery in India, which led to Gujarat state government to look into it, and then the 30 gigawatt Khavda happened. So there is a application and there is grant for deployment at a scale up, and there is also grant for doing R&D. The second phase, which is like R&D and product, is a scale up where you need supply chain, ecosystem, manufacturing build up, where, if I'm producing a battery, whatever the membrane, whatever the electrode, are there manufacturers coming in that ecosystem? That need to be developed to be able to get a true value and manufacture at scale at high yield.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think collaborations do exist between private, even with our company, we actually actively collaborate with universities wherever we need to test products or wherever we need to understand the basic biology, let's say, of the plant that we're growing. So there are a lot of opportunities because I think private companies cannot do all of R&D. They can do development. A lot of basic research and science, I think, can still happen in the university. And it's all depends on the company's requirements, particular ventures requirements.
Second question there.
Just very briefly, in context of healthcare, I think what can actually help more is the triangle of the clinical validation. And IISc is a great example. So the research happens, private partnership, industry participates, but also now a hospital comes in. So you have an innovator, you have the research institute, but also you have a clinical validation. When all these three come together, your acceleration happens fast, and then the impact actually translates. And that, as India, we can afford more such setups in India. So I agree with you that, especially in healthcare, we can have this kind of tri-party things, entities more.
Great, thanks. Second question.
Hi, my name is Kunal. I have a question. I work as a writer, content writer. I have a question for Dr. Avishek Kumar. I wanted to understand, given the way you structured your company, how much has it helped you given the rare earth crisis, and the export bans in China? How did you navigate through that, unforeseen? It came out of the blue in April last year. So how have you navigated it, and how much of a concern is it for your businesses?
So our thesis was to develop something locally, and our technology is vanadium redox flow battery technologies, which is 15th most abundant element on Earth. And choosing India was also because we can find that vanadium can be recycled from low quality crude. So a lot of refineries are producing it, and that gives us a demand of roughly about 3 gigawatt hour. and then vanadium is recyclable. So we had looked into it from a perspective of how can we produce 100% locally in India, and that's the reason to scale up manufacturing here. So, but from that particular perspective, but we are also looking at, with critical mineral, government is actively looking at recycling other materials, and there is good development happening at research and at industry scale.
At the back.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Stuti. I'm the co-founder of Mind Electric. We are building iron air batteries for long duration energy storage. Again, was lovely hearing all of you, talk about challenges as, early stage startup building in deep tech, hardware, energy as a field as well. I think I'm living through all that you mentioned. Again, my personal opinion in this is, as we scale such, deep tech technologies or product, at scale, it's no longer a B2B or B2G play, but it should be seen as a critical infrastructure for the country. And in that case, government involvement or government support becomes not just a good to have, but like a necessary requirement to scale up. So given that all of you at certain points in time would have definitely spoken, licensed, or negotiated with government officials, be it across PSUs or through members of parliament, both India and internationally. Just wanted to get your thoughts on what are the key challenges in navigating those conversations with government stakeholders.
So right now, there is not much challenge. You need to advocate your technologies to all PSUs, and as far as I understand, all PSUs have been mandated to look into new technologies. NTPC would be your best bet because they are trying all technologies and they are giving a pilot of 100 to 200 megawatt hour, which is good to validate any technologies at that scale. NTPC is there, HPCL is there, you have BHEL is there. These people have demand, and then IPP. So you need to find an anchor customer or anchor user. Government is very proactive in that particular aspect. What we need to lobby is that PLI scheme has to be broader for other manufacturing. That need to be lobbied, but you need to find an anchor user.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Great. I think that pretty much brings this session to an end. I'd like to thank Kedar, Abhishek, and Sailaja. Thank you very much. Big hand for our panelists. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and all the very best to all of you, as well as for myself, to ensure that we're able to scale the manufacturing of our startups. Thanks. Thank you very much.